I'm here with Republican challenger for Ag Commissioner Nate Sheets. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mr. Sheets.
Thanks for having me, Adam. It's great to be here.
So, you're going up against the long-term incumbent, Sid Miller. Talk about how this campaign came together and why you decided to run.
Yeah, I started a honey company called Nature Nate's from one beehive in my backyard, turned it into the largest honey company in America over about 30 years. I also spent 12 years in full-time Christian ministry, also served our country in the Navy. And so really I was raised with the mindset of serving communities, serving our country. And I had stepped away as the CEO from Nature Nate's in November of 24, and I was with a friend of mine, Rick Santorum, in Washington, D.C., having lunch, and we were just talking about phases of life. And he's a politician, and when you're a hammer, the answer is always a nail. And so he was just talking about politics, and he said, think about Texas, the real power and with your background and experience is to be able to go and run for something like Ag Commissioner and go focus on cleaning up food, which you have dealt with and dealing with pesticides in the honey business. And then also go help farmers and ranchers, be successful because we continue to lose agriculture at alarming rates. And so it was really at his encouragement, and then, conferring with my wife and praying about it. But I was curious, what is the breadth of the Ag Commissioner? I've been one of our current Ag Commissioner's supporters for a long time. And so I was surprised by when I went and looked at what the job description entails and I thought about what I see on social media. Those two things really didn't match up. And so I took him out to lunch, asked him if he was going to run again. He said he wanted to run for the Senate for John Cornyn's seat. I said, that's a great idea. And I'm interested in running for Ag Commissioner and cleaning up food and helping farmers and ranchers be successful. And he said, you should run. I asked him if that was an endorsement. He said, no. So what he would say is, I meant you should run if I didn't run. So we started praying about it, talking to folks, and I think the more people we talk to, the more exuberance and enthusiasm and pleading, especially from moms that are in the public school system. In Texas, we're 44th of the nation in nutritional value in school lunch programs, which actually part of the commissioner's responsibility, feeding 5.5 million kids in the school lunch program. And our current commissioner, one of his very first duties as the Ag Commissioner was to bring sodas and sweet snacks and fryers back into the public school system. And maybe there's a correlation between being 44th in nutritional value and being 41st in education. Maybe the kids perform how they eat. And so those are some of the reasons why we felt like this is the greatest place where we can make the greatest impact with our life and serve Texas.
Speaking of that, the role of Ag Commissioner, it's kind of, I think for most people, this unattainable, vague Ag Commissioner, but while you are working for the agriculture sector, you have to get votes statewide. What's your pitch to people, Texas voters, who might not necessarily be clued in with the agriculture sector as to why this role matters and why agriculture matters?
If you eat food, this role matters. You probably intersect more with the Texas Department of Agriculture than any other agency besides petroleum on a daily basis. Now, the question I love to ask people is, do you feel like the food that we eat is connected to our health? And everybody has a resounding absolutely. And we have a chronic pandemic of disease in America right now, where we have 70% of all Americans have one chronic disease or more. 78% of kids 18 to 25 can't even serve in the military because of their health. We spend $4 trillion a year at the federal level paying for symptoms of diseases related to our food. And even in Texas, we'll spend $100 billion on Medicaid. So we're paying for it as a country and as a state. But unfortunately, we're paying for it on the back end in both quality of life and sickness. And we just need to reverse that thinking and try to get it on the front end. And we think about what Brooke Rollins and Secretary Kennedy did recently about turning the food pyramid upside down and getting rid of the processed foods. And it's all about whole, nutritious, grains and meats. And I like to think of it, President Trump says that it's the golden age of America. I think it's the golden age of agriculture. And we're going to go and help farmers and ranchers not just survive, but thrive.
Yeah, and it seems like there's been this push in Texas on the Make America Healthy Again movement. In fact, we had Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy come down to the Texas Capitol to celebrate some MAHA legislation that was passed. How much does that MAHA movement inspire the work that you want to do as the Ag Commissioner? When
I first started doing beekeeping, I realized that there are the things that get into agriculture just because it's agriculture. Animals get sick, you got to treat animals. You know, we have to utilize tools like pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. And so those things, unfortunately, can get into food sometimes. And so that's why when I started doing the honey company full time, I tested for herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, corn syrup, rice syrup, antibiotics, twice, all the honey that I bought, because unfortunately things do get into our food supply. But even after it leaves the farm, things get into our food supply. And so when I think about the health of Americans, you know, my mission statement at Nature Nates was to glorify God and help you and your family live healthy lives. And so the health of all Americans was sacrosanct to us as an organization, because I always felt like high processed sugars were killing Americans, and we needed to go and replace those processed sugars with honey, which is the best, most nutritious sweetener there. And so we started engineering products with honey instead of other sweeteners, and to bring them out to the public. So I've been dealing with the pesticides for 30 years. I've been dealing with the health of Americans and the food we consume for 30 years. And so I look at this time that we have in America right now with Secretary Kennedy and Secretary Rollins as just this ripe moment in time for us to be able to take advantage of this opportunity to really get in and make changes that can impact us for generations to come.
Last Wednesday, you secured what's probably the second most coveted endorsement in this state behind the president himself. You secured the endorsement of Governor Greg Abbott, as opposed to, once again, you're running against an incumbent who has been in this role for years, Sid Miller. What were your thoughts on getting that endorsement?
I was blown away. You know, but I also think if you go and read what the governor said, that he said a pretty big statement about why he was willing to put his name against a sitting statewide incumbent for the very first time. And unfortunately, the Texas Department of Agriculture has been plagued with, you know, well, I'll use his words, criminality and ethic issues, which really stem around the Chief of Staff, Todd Smith, who was Sid Miller's consultant for 25 years. And when they brought the hemp licensing to Texas, that you could get a TDA hemp license for $100. But Todd Smith went out and told farmers there would only be 15 in Texas. So if you wanted to make sure, Adam, that you got a hemp license, give me $25,000 and I'll make sure you get one. Well, after he had $150,000 wired to his account, they arrested him and charged him with a felony for commercial bribery, defrauding farmers. So November 24, he wound up pleading guilty. They would have convicted him, but he pled guilty, so Sid Miller wouldn't have had to have testified against him. They had subpoenaed Sid. But since he pled guilty to a felony, he couldn't be a lobbyist any longer, and so he was unemployed. So of course, Sid Miller hired him as Chief of Staff, where he makes $218,000 today, working at the Texas Department of Agriculture. Sid Miller likes to say, when we've debated the 5 or 6, 7 times, he says, Todd Smith is the best hire I've ever had. Well, if that's true, 2 months ago, I could go on the TDA website under About, and you would see an org chart with Sid and Todd Smith and all the other leadership team there. You go on that website today, there is no org chart on there under About. And so if you're so proud of your Chief of Staff, why are you hiding them? And so when I'm out speaking, you know, I want people to fact check me just like I want them to fact check Sid. And so I tell people, last night in Kerrville, I said, listen, go out and Google Todd Smith felon, and just see what comes up. And so I think those are the types of things that the governor understands and believes, that these are distractions away from the very core mission of helping farmers and ranchers succeed. We've lost 18,000 farms in Texas since 2018. 18,000 farms, that's 1,000 acres a week. And the reason is because farmers can't afford to be in business. And so we need a commissioner who's focused on helping agriculture thrive.
So I got the chance to talk to Commissioner Miller on Monday, and he reiterated that statement about Todd Smith being the best hire he ever had. The way he saw the indictment was, he says it's lawfare, trumped up charge by a Soros-backed DA. What's your response to that statement from Sid?
Yeah, he likes to say that the same way that the Soros teams were coming after Donald Trump, they came after Sid Miller and Todd Smith. You know what? Donald Trump never pled guilty to a felony. There's a big difference. And so a felony is a felony, and he pled guilty. And go look at the arrest warrant and go read that he had $150,000 wired to his account. So, and actually, the DA in Travis County did not want to prosecute. and it was the Texas Department of Public Safety or the Texas Rangers. They were the ones that pursued the criminality. So there is no George Soros. He just likes to distract you away from what the reality and the truth is.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some agriculture issues again.
Come on.
So people in Texas, they love their beef, but when they go to the grocery store, they're seeing that beef price increase a lot. And I know there's a lot of cattle ranchers who are also being harmed on the other end. How do you make sure that you can bolster the farmers who are producing this beef and also keep those prices low for consumers in the grocery stores?
Yeah, if you think about where we stand right now in society, that we're dealing with affordability issues. I mean, ever since the COVID inflation and Joe Biden in there, and they were spending money like drunk college kids. I mean, inflation has hit people's pocketbooks the most, especially in the grocery store. And so Donald Trump is focused on driving affordability for consumers. And so he talked about bringing Argentinian beef in, which is a short-term solution, but not a long-term solution. And so the challenge we have in Texas right now is we have record high beef prices, that we have the border closed because of the New World screwworm, which is like a fly that lays an egg, and that maggot burrows into a living host and eats the living flesh from the inside out. And it's down in Mexico. We've had infestations in the past. And so because of that, we've closed the border between Mexico and Texas. So we're not getting the throughput of animals that we need. We just saw Tyson just laid off 1,700 people on a shift because they don't have the throughput to be able to go into those plants. And so, but again, we have the lowest herd population that we've had in 70 years and record high prices. And so there's got to be a lot of intentionality to both grow that herd, take care of the screwworm issue and ensure that it does not come into Texas, but also start to think about those two things are in conflict of each other as it relates to bringing food prices down and helping farmers and ranchers make more money. Well, how do we do that? So being in the food business, I would sell a product for $2, and by the time it got to a grocery store shelf, because of all of the types of distribution and warehousing that go along the way, it might be $6 or $7. And so the difference between $2 and $6 or $7, that $5 that's in there, how do we start to redirect that back to producers to be able to make that margin themselves? Now that brings on another challenge that we have. In Texas, we had 700 meat processing plants all across Texas in 1970. And at that point, a rancher who would have a steer and send them off, he would make 70 cents of $1 of food. The packers at that point made 30 cents. Well, today, 55 years later, there are 4 meat packers that control 85% of the meat market in America. And 2 of those companies are owned by Brazilian companies. Now, the packers, they make 70 cents, and the producers make 30 cents. It's switched. So whether you're in cotton, corn, or cattle, farmers have lost optionality because of agriculture consolidation. We used to have hundreds of seed companies. Now we have a couple. We used to have hundreds of grain buyers. Now we have a couple. We used to have hundreds of equipment companies. Now we have a couple. And because of private equity and investors that come in and buy small businesses and roll them together and make big businesses, the people that have gotten the short end of the stick are the cotton, corn, and cattle that no longer have an option to go try to create a finished product that they can go sell to a consumer directly. Instead, they're selling to a buyer of grain. I talked to a cotton farmer last week in Beaumont. He farms 6,000 acres, and he was on the way to go sell his rice crop for 40% less than his actual input cost. So how long can you sustain selling your product for 40% less than it actually costs you to make it? Not very long. And so if we can help that guy be able to access more consumers, but the only way we can do that is if he has some next stage to go take his rice and how do you get it into a bag that he can ultimately sell to someone and be able to sell it for more. And so it's really, as we think about those two things at odds, it's that middle dollars that we got to figure out how we bring more towards the producer, and then as we do that, even bring down grocery store prices at the same time.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about that I know a lot of rural Texans have concerns about is the proliferation of these AI data centers across the state, specifically competing for valuable resources of land and water with agriculture land. How do you plan on addressing this issue, or do you even see it as an issue?
Again, and agriculture is so complex because Donald Trump went and federalized in July of last year, went and federalized data center construction. The reason why he did that is he didn't want local municipalities to be able to come in and to delay that process, because from an AI data storage standpoint, we are in a race against China for global dominance of artificial intelligence. And we're racing towards general intelligence, which means that AI is writing AI, not people writing code that's AI. And so these data centers are, the backbone of us being able to win this global race. And in this race, he who gets there first is going to rule the world. And Donald Trump sees it in that way. And so in one sense, we got to continue to plow forward. But in another sense, it's unfortunate that we have these data centers being built in agriculture in areas where water is very near and dear. But again, I want to go back to the issue in hand. If you're a rice farmer and you're selling your product for 40% less than it actually costs you to make it, it doesn't take too many years for some guy to come to you and say, I'll pay you $10,000 an acre. And your kids don't want to be a rice farmer because they've seen you struggle. And so you're like, finally, my golden parachute. I can retire and go play with my grandkids and not lose money every year being a farmer. Farmers have lost the options. So if we can go help them be successful and start to make money and make more revenue, then they have the option to not sell their land, and maybe that data center's got to go somewhere else, and maybe it's a little bit closer to a city.
Well, just to wrap, as we're running short on time here, I wanted to ask you, it's been 30 years of dominance for Republicans in statewide offices. In fact, it seems often like the primary is more like the general election. You're going up against Sid Miller in this primary. Should you make it out, there are candidates on the other side of the aisle. I just talked to Clayton Tucker, a Democratic candidate, a little over an hour ago. How much are you paying attention to that other aisle of the race? And how much are you paying attention to the Democratic side of this race?
Eventually I will pay attention, but that's March 4th. So right now we're focused on and winning the Republican nomination, working hard. We've got the endorsements of, the very top agriculture person in the state of Texas, Senator Charles Perry, the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. We've got Texas cattle feeders, Texas cattle raisers, National Cutting Horse Association, the Wildlife Association, and we continue to get, we've got SREC, we've got Senator Kevin Sparks, Senator Angela Paxton, lots of precinct chairs. This is a Mattress Mac from Houston, and so we've got an amazing amount of endorsements. And so we're going to continue to have that same push. I told our team yesterday in our team meeting, we're going to act like the wind is in our face, and we're going to keep running that hard all the way to March 4th. And then we'll start to put our focus onto our Democratic challenger, and I'll look forward to debating him just like I've looked forward to debating my opponent.
All right, to wrap up, is there anything else you want to say? Last word's yours.
If you feel like the direction that agriculture has gone in Texas, I'd ask you to come and join our team, at natesheets.com, and you can go follow us on social media, Nate Sheets for TX or Nate Sheets for Texas. And if you feel like there's a change that's needed in Texas, it's going to take every single one of us to be able to do that. And so come follow us, share it with your friends, invite them to come follow us, and then let's get out on February 17th to March 3rd, and let's vote Nate Sheets for Texas.
Nate Sheets, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.